And David O'Sullivan is the EU ambassador to the United States. He was part of those negotiations at the White House, and he is in Washington this evening. We thank you so much for joining us, David.
Thank you very much. My pleasure.
I'd like to begin by asking you about something that you previously said. You mentioned that we have moved in your assessment from what could have been a negative feedback loop to a positive feedback loop when it comes to trade. Why is that?
Well, because I think prior to the meeting yesterday and the very good understanding reached between President Juncker and President Trump, we were in a situation where the United States had imposed tariffs on steel and aluminium exports from the European Union unfairly, in our view. We had then reacted by imposing rebalancing tariffs on exports from the United States. We were in a situation where the United States was threatening potentially to put illegal tariffs on cars and car parts, which would have required us in turn to retaliate. And this was going to lead to a major escalation in trade conflict between two parts of the world, the United States and the European Union, which, as President Trump said, are actually the most important, each other's most important economic partners. So what the two presidents achieved yesterday was to stop that downward spiral, to call a suspension in the imposition of any new tariffs, and to create a space where we can try to work forward on a positive agenda, touching on the various areas which your reporter just mentioned, namely going to zero on industrial products. Please.
Sorry, David, for interrupting you there. I just wanted to ask you, but can that positive development be relied upon? Because, you know, when you look at President Trump, he has spent the better part of his presidency undermining the EU and its leaders. He even called the EU a foe recently. So how can you be confident that we're now entering a better time for transatlantic relations?
Well, I think the president's use of the word foe, actually, he clarified to say he meant an economic competitor. So I think it didn't have quite the implication that some people tried to attribute to it. And I think, honestly, we have to take people at their word. President Juncker and President Trump sat down yesterday. They talked for over 3 hours. They worked their way through the issues, and they established a good relationship and were able to come out with this agreement, which is both a process, a working group, a roadmap, a time frame, and a concrete list of issues through which we will work our way in order to put us on, as I say, a much more positive and constructive relationship where we can grow our trade, develop our trade even further than that which exists today, rather than fighting with each other and imposing tariffs which increase costs to consumers and to companies.
Trump had the following to say in the wake of the meeting. He wrote this, in fact, on Twitter, and I'd just like to read it and then get your reaction thereafter. He writes, "Obviously, the European Union, as represented by Jean-Claude Juncker, and the United States, as represented by yours truly, love each other." And we can see a picture there of the two of them embracing. And we know that you had a front row seat to this meeting. I mean, do you agree, first of all, with that assessment? And if so, why were these talks so successful where others have failed?
Well, in politics, as ever, there's always a combination of circumstances and personalities. I think it's clear that a major contributor to the positive developments yesterday was the good relationship struck up between President Trump and President Juncker, not just yesterday, but in meetings in the G7 and other formats where they have established a certain mutual respect and a certain mutual confidence. And then, equally, we were able to come with some ideas and some suggestions as to how we could move from a situation of mutual recrimination to actually trying to improve and develop our economic relations. So that's how the things worked yesterday. Of course, we haven't solved all the problems. Some of these issues will not be easy to work through, but I think we have created a new dynamic, and both sides are now committed to trying to take this forward in the most constructive way possible in the best interests of our companies and consumers and citizens on both sides of the Atlantic.
And as we know, the devil is so often in the details, so to speak. So given that, where do negotiations go from here, would you say? Because, you know, Trump, for example, he talked yesterday about the elimination of trade barriers in his statement. Is TTIP back on the table?
No, I think this is very definitely not TTIP 2.0 or TTIP light. This is a series of agreements which cover different issues. One is a potential trade deal, which would be the abolition of tariffs, bringing tariffs to zero on industrial products, which are the ones of greatest concern, particularly to the American colleagues, in particular auto tariffs. The other then is to look at ways in which we can grow American exports to Europe, such as LNG or soya, and then a joint agenda working in the WTO. So these are not all wrapped together in one mega trade deal of the TTIP kind. This is a rather more step-by-step approach, looking at these problems in their different dimensions.
David, just briefly before we go, I'd like to ask you a question about your work, because we know, for example, that the U.S. president, he is known as being erratic, unpredictable, at times even hostile to allies. In your diplomacy, what have you learned about how to deal with the current administration, and what advice are you giving to EU officials when it comes to dealing with Trump?
Well, I mean, this is a president who has been elected on a very explicit platform of being a disruptor. President Trump delights in breaking with tradition and finding new ways of doing things. This takes a little bit of adjustment. It's taken a bit of adjustment for the American system. It's taken a bit of adjustment for his foreign allies and partners. My advice to Europe and to all our colleagues is simply to remain consistent to our own principles. As your foreign minister said, very important for Europe to remain united, to be fair, to be straight, to be direct, to stick to our positions when they are reasonable and when they are necessary, and to show some flexibility, as President Juncker did yesterday, if this means we can find an accommodation which is a win-win outcome. And I think that's the skill that President Juncker demonstrated yesterday, and which hopefully will carry us forward to making this into a very concrete achievements in the next few months.
And David O'Sullivan, as we mentioned, you're the EU ambassador to the United States, and you were part of those negotiations at the White House. We thank you so much for joining us this evening to share your firsthand perspective. We appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Thank you.